Hi, I'm Sharon Adler, and I'm a nephrologist in Southern California. I'm professor of medicine at the David Geffen School of Medicine.
My name is Cynthia Nast, and I'm a pathologist. I'm professor of pathology and director of renal pathology at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, and I'm also a professor of pathology at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA.
So for the last 15 years or so, my research has focused on membership in consortia that are NIH funded, that are looking to basically transform the classification and therapies for patients with rare glomerular diseases so that they focus on a precision medicine algorithm where patients may be both diagnosed and treated according to molecular signatures, which would bring glomerular medicine, if you will, to a very new and exciting place with targeted treatments for patients with these rare diseases.
I'm also part of these NIH-funded consortia, which include Cure Glomerular Nephropathy, also known as Cure-GN, NEPTUNE, and Cure-GN Diabetes, which adds patients with diabetes to these cohorts of patients with glomerular diseases. I participate as a pathologist, performing detailed descriptions of the digitized kidney biopsy slides and electron micrographs, and collaborate in studies, as Dr. Adler described, using the rich clinical and pathology data that these studies provide. I also undertake clinical research using kidney biopsy material in our archives at Cedars-Sinai, and I have an additional particular interest in complement-mediated glomerular diseases.
The consortia that we're describing have been around now for 15, 16 years, and that's what makes them so powerful. One a little bit less duration than the other, but for more than a decade. And the power of these consortia is that there's been a long time to collect longitudinal data and clinical samples and understand outcomes for these patients. But Dr. Nast and I have done research together for more than 30 years, I would say.
It's
around
close
30
to 40
years.
years, actually.
Yeah. And we've spanned the spectrum from interest in chronic interstitial nephritis in agricultural communities to abnormalities induced by peritoneal dialysate in the peritoneal membrane, to kidney diseases that are not necessarily glomerular. So our friendship and our interests are way broader than glomerular diseases, but our passion is for glomerular diseases.
And we also have done previous studies together on basic mechanisms in diabetic kidney disease and focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. And while we have, as Dr. Adler said, worked together on broad areas of kidney disease, our interest in collaborations in glomerular diseases goes back 35 years.
Yes. So NEPTUNE, the Nephrotic Syndrome Study Network, is spearheading a precision medicine clinical trial arm as we march forward for the next 5 years. So there are clinical trials associated with NEPTUNE where the idea is to see if understanding the patient's molecular signature helps to improve the outcomes where in clinical trials. So if you know the molecular signature and the patient chooses to enter a trial where that molecular signature is specifically being addressed, will that improve clinical trial outcome, and will it improve the outcome of the patient? And that is, we also have a trial for African Americans who have risk haplotypes for APOL1 and either hypertension with proteinuria and focal and segmental glomerulosclerosis. So we have a broad spectrum of clinical trials at my center for a number of different glomerular diseases.
So as a pathologist, obviously I don't enroll patients in clinical trials, but my role in clinical trials is to help identify potential participants based on their kidney biopsy findings. And then I can inform that patient's nephrologist of the suitability of that patient for a potential clinical trial. And the nephrologist can then contact the patient, who may decide to contact Dr. Adler and enroll in a clinical trial. So while I don't perform clinical trials, I can help identify potential participants for those clinical trials.
So our research is their research too. I mean, the goal is to understand glomerular diseases so that we can develop treatments that are targeted to specific patients to make them better. So we do have the same goals. And in that sense, yes, it's beneficial. And I have to say that that it's not just the site PI and the pharmaceutical company, but it is the broad swath of investigators and people in statistical analytics that have partnered together. Also the societies, National Kidney Foundation, American Society of Nephrology, and now the International Society of Glomerular Diseases, that are banding together to pull together data to push the clinical trial field forward. So in the last, I would say, 10 years, that group, which also included the FDA and NIH, pulled together analytic data that would provide a new surrogate outcome for clinical trials for IgA nephropathy. And that surrogate outcome was a decline in proteinuria. And the FDA accepted that surrogate outcome with the idea that 2 years later, additional data would have to be provided that actually kidney function itself, estimated GFR, would also be positively impacted. And what happened was that the first medication fully approved for IgA nephropathy, Tarpeo, or long-acting budesonide, became available in the last 2 years as a direct result of this massive partnership among providers and patients and governmental agencies and pharma and foundations. And a second drug was approved based on the surrogate outcome, and the FDA is going to take action on whether or not they will give it final approval in the next few weeks. So we never had an FDA-approved drug for IgA nephropathy, and we've had very few drugs approved for glomerular diseases in the last 20 years. So we're seeing really an amazing positive outcomes from these collaborations for patients with glomerular diseases right now. And it's a really heady time for patients in this field. I'm a member of the American Society of Nephrology, but I'm also the treasurer of the International Society of Glomerular Diseases, which was just started in May of 2023, and I'm a member of the board of directors of the ISGD.
I'm a member also of the American Society of Nephrology, the ISGD, for which I'm on the education committee, the NKF, and on the pathology side, the U.S. and Canadian Academy of Pathology, and I'm the past president of the Renal Pathology Society. Both Dr. Adler and I have participated in a number of, I don't know if they're leadership roles, but certainly in terms of providing services to these organizations, particularly the nephrology organizations, as running glomerular disease pre-course, which Dr. Adler does, giving lectures, moderating sessions, reviewing abstracts, participating in CME activities such as NEFSAP, being members of working groups in different areas. So both of us have participated quite a bit in providing services on the professional side to these organizations.
Well, I did participate on the KDIGO guideline committee for glomerular diseases. KDIGO is another separate entity from NKF and ASN. It kind of grew out of NKF, but became independent. So KDIGO really writes the guidelines for nephrology. But otherwise, I think, what I said before really covers the goals of all of these professional societies. All of us are there to not simply to understand the science, but to understand the science in the service of patients and treatments.
And these organizations provide not only sometimes support for these collaborations, but a venue for sharing the science at the annual meetings, for education, such as in the glomerular pre-course that Sharon has co-chaired and I've given lectures for. So there are educational and collaborative and sharing opportunities that these organizations provide. But I also would like to point out that some of the studies like NEPTUNE and CureGN have have committees of patients to have their input into the study participation and outcomes. The Kidney Precision Medicine Project, or KPMP, has a very strong patient arm, and patients are very much becoming involved in these different studies to provide their input. And also there are educational fora for patients in these. So I know NEPTUNE, for example, we used to have fireside chats where, these would be for patients to come and listen and answer questions or ask questions and so on and get information. And some of the offshoot organizations, I know another physician, Elaine Camille, was very involved in patient education opportunities that I think might have been an offshoot of NKF. So there are in specific patient education and engagement opportunities that are provided by studies as well as some organizations.
So Cindy prompted me to bring up one additional organization, and that is NephCure. And NephCure is a nonprofit foundation that is focused entirely on patients and their experiences, their responses, and including them in the connection between patients and pharma. NephCure does specific meetings for patients, informational meetings about glomerular diseases. NephCure is focused on glomerular diseases and particularly on nephrotic glomerular diseases, but not exclusively. And they have identified a cadre of specialists in nephrology and pathology who are identified experts in these rare diseases. They connect patients who often don't have access to these experts with access to experts, and they bring the patient into the even some design aspects of clinical trials, so that the clinical trials may be designed specifically with the input of patients and families. So NephCure is a very important organization, and NephCure was actually the organization that kind of helped to push forward the IgA approvals, and it is now doing a parallel process for focal and segmental glomerulosclerosis to try to find a surrogate outcome that would allow pharmaceutical companies to invest in the development of new medications in this area. So, especially in Los Angeles, we were aware of Karger publications in nephrology because Karger's first nephrology journal, the American Journal of Nephrology, was developed by Shaul Masri, who was a nephrologist in LA, in association with Karger. So we knew about Karger since Karger ever published a nephrology journal. And then in 2019, Cindy and I were thinking that particularly NEPTUNE, the Nephrotic Syndrome Study Network, had generated enough excitement and enough data in glomerular diseases that we thought glomerular diseases should have its own journal. And the notion was that glomerular disease publications, if they were genetics, might go into a genetics journal, and if they were basic science, might go to JCI, and if they were clinical, there were lots of different places to put it. So it didn't have really a home, and we thought that the baby had grown up enough to have its own home. And so we approached Karger at its ASN booth in November, I guess, of 2019, where we made a proposal, and Karger had sufficient vision so that by mid-January, they approved the concept, and we've been working with Karger since then. So I'm editor-in-chief and Cindy's deputy editor of Glomerular Diseases. And as we've done for 30 years with our research, we work hand in hand on developing this new journal with our Karger editorial staff and managers.
But we do feel that the journal publishes very high quality articles, and we are getting better visibility due to the very rapid PubMed indexing, which we give Karger a lot of credit for. And also now we've established a relationship with the International Society of Glomerular Diseases, as Sharon has alluded to. So we are, we've worked together to not only launch the journal and get really great articles in it, but have developed some special article types like Kidney Biopsy Corner, and Sharon, what's the name of the case one with the Fabry?
Cutting Edge.
Okay, thank you. The Cutting Edge. Yeah, and Karger has a number of nephrology journals, some of which are subspecialty area focused. So it seemed that it might be a good fit for another, very subspecialized first-in-class nephrology journal to fill that gap in the nephrology publishing space, as Sharon has already alluded to, that glomerular disease really didn't have another home.
We work very hard to put together a connection between CARGR and the International Society of Glomerular Diseases through our personal relationships with both people on the CARGR side and people on the ISGD side. We've helped to develop an associate editor and editorial board group that's broadly international and as passionate and committed to glomerular diseases as Cindy and I are. We are, for the last 2 years, for the last 2 meetings, and also for the next meeting, Glomerular Diseases by CARGR is the publisher of the abstracts of the international podocyte meetings. We will be co-publishing the white paper on treatment of membranous nephropathy and the future research needed in membranous nephropathy. We will be co-publishing with Kidney International, and I'm hoping to also co-publish the results of the focal and segmental glomerulosclerosis meetings that will take place to try and find surrogate outcomes. So we hope to ramp up this journal so that it is widely recognized, published perhaps more frequently than quarterly, and while maintaining its current outstanding quality of papers.
Yeah, I fundamentally agree with Sharon. We certainly hope the journal continues to grow and flourish as it gets more publicity through ISGD, and just as it's been around longer, so papers can get cited more, that will get more submissions. And we're Sharon and I both actively try to interact with the glomerular disease community to bring awareness of the journal to them so that they will submit papers to the journal. And we have found CARGR to be, willing to partner with us in doing this and to make the journal more widely available, and available in terms of being out there, pushing the content so people can see it and be aware of it, and having it grow.